welcome you to the second one in our official lecture series this term. There'll be many more coming up. I just wanted to welcome you and make a few announcements. For those of you that are members of the American Institute of Architects and would like to receive continuing educational credit, there's on the back table there next to Julie in the back is a yellow, thank you, prompt. A yellow folder with a sheet in there to sign upon. And so please do so. And at this time, I'm just going to turn it over to another member of the lecture committee, our very able Andy Soul.
There's a few of us on the lecture committee who decided to invite John here, and I think that's because of, well, all of you know there's a broad range of interests here in the department, but social activism seems to be a really strong undercurrent running through a lot of the students here and the professors, and I thought that John's work with public architecture and the 1% program would really speak to that idea of architect as activist. And to give a brief background for John, he started Petersen Architects in 1993, and Petersen Architects for about 15 years did a great deal of pro bono work for a lot of organizations in the Bay Area and other places. And then in 2002, he founded Public Architecture, and then in 2008, he became a full-time chief spokesperson and strategist, as well as the design director, member of the board of directors, president and founder of these titles. So John has also been appointed by Mayor Gavin Newsom of San Francisco to their Green Vision Council, the Open Space Task Force. He's been elected member of South Market Business Association and is a current member of Urban Solutions Board of Directors. And he's also, of course, won numerous awards. Jefferson Award for Public Service, many citations from all levels of the AIA, the Nice Modernist Award from Dell Magazine, as well as 2009 Designer of the Year Award with his executive director, John Kerry. And John earned his BA from RISD and was also a Rhodes Fellow at Harvard Graduate School. So, without further ado, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. Can you hear me? Does this work as it should? Yes, all the way back. Thank you. This is an illegal immigrant who's actually one of our clients, who I'll talk about a little more later on. But I like this image, and it's an interesting image to come into a lecture. It was actually taken by an art photographer that we worked with named Elena Dorfman. So as Andrea mentioned, I have a private practice. I come from a private practice background, and then through some of the work that my private practice was doing, I made a decision to start a nonprofit organization to try to continue that work and spread throughout the profession a new way we might look at how we approach practice, in particular public service. So I'm going to start by talking about a client named Martha Ryan. Martha Ryan was a prenatal nurse that primarily practiced in third world countries, helping the very poor populations deal with prenatal care. About 15 years ago, she was back in San Francisco, where her home is, from a great deal of travel, and happened to run across a small group of women who were living in San Francisco, homeless women who were living in San Francisco who also needed prenatal services. And she realized that the needs that these women had in downtown San Francisco were identical to the needs that she was seeing in third world countries around the globe. And she decided that she wanted to try to assist that community. She wrote a grant, got $20,000, and started an organization called Homeless Prenatal, or the Homeless Prenatal Program. When I met Martha, I was asked by one of the board of directors to help them envision a new facility. They were outgrowing a facility that really underserved them, kept them from being the organization that they were destined to be. They were strewn over 3 stories in a mid-rise building in downtown San Francisco. And single-loaded, double-loaded hallway, a series of rooms that were designed for small professionals, accountants, bookkeepers, and the like. They had raised some money and had purchased a piece of property in the Mission District of San Francisco and asked if we would look at building them a new facility. This is a marvelous opportunity for an architect in San Francisco. Hard to build a ground-up building in San Francisco. Those opportunities don't come that often. So we're very excited to help them do this. Unfortunately, when we looked more closely at the solution, which is to build a multi-story building on a very constrained lot in an area of fill. As you know, San Francisco's in earthquake country, and building on fill is not advisable unless you find some way to secure that building, and that meant driving piers very deeply into the ground, and the cost to build this building we had estimated around $7 million. I knew the market well enough. This is 2001, 2002, I think, maybe 2002. The dot-com crash had happened in 99, 2000, and I knew that there were good, large buildings that were available at a deal because dot-coms had moved into these warehouse buildings, spent a great deal of money to fix them up, and then went out of business. And there wasn't a user that was able to fill that gap. So in spite of our lust for designing a new building, we recommended that they investigate looking at existing buildings that were on the market. We went through several buildings, test and fit. This is just one example, looking at how we could fit her organization into an existing building. We ended up finding a building that was a real deal. It was actually over 30% larger than what they needed. It had been aggressively renovated. A tremendous amount of money had been spent on it. It was nearly good to go for them, and as you can see, the price tag was far less, and they were able to sublease out that extra 30% as an income generator. Quick images. I have mixed feelings about this project because we really were just tailors. We really just sort of hemmed the pants and took in the sleeves. Much of the work had already been done and suited them very well, and in fact, of course, saved them a great deal of money. But I feel strongly about the role that we played, and I feel very strongly about the impact that we had on that organization and our work as a designer, as a design thinker, as a design strategist. We helped them develop a solution that was far better for their organization than building a ground-up building. And this is after they've moved in. 3 architects in my practice worked on this project, and we donated 140 hours pro bono to assist Martha and in the homeless prenatal program. The savings in just identifying that building and moving them into that building over new construction was over $2 million. That for their program, and that program has morphed from serving pregnant and newborn mothers and their newborns to servicing families, and that amount of money allowed them to service 900 families, which otherwise would not have gotten service. So our investment of 140 hours led to service being provided to 900 families. Since the time that I met Martha, their funding resources have gone up 400%. Certainly, we're not solely responsible or even significantly responsible for that, but we did have an impact on that organization, and Martha would be the first one to say that. And we were able to help them become a much healthier and much more dynamic organization. Now, Martha is the exception. Martha had a really smart board of directors. One of those board of directors knew how to access the design community, knew to tap me on the shoulder, knew how to ask me for help, and was able to really exploit what the design community had to offer. And as you can imagine, that's not a typical story for nonprofit organizations. This is just a way of thinking about the need that's out there. So, as I mentioned, I started public architecture through work like this with really two thoughts. One that I'll talk about a little bit later, actually I think right after this if I remember correctly. This is a brand new presentation for us. We worked with a graphic designer in LA, in New York, Studio Lynn, Alex Lynn, and so I'm showing this almost for the first time, and so if I stumble around a little bit, I apologize. As I mentioned, I started public architecture with two ideas in mind. One, bringing services, design services, to clients in need, clients who may otherwise not have access to more thoughtful design services. And on the other side, putting architects in the role of problem identifier and not just problem solver. So looking at architecture as a more entrepreneurial profession, or having a more entrepreneurial aspect to it. This is our organization. We have 7 full-time employees, about 20 volunteers at the moment. John Carey is our executive director on the far right-hand side, who I asked to become the executive director a year after we started the organization. This is basically our business model, if you will. We seek the commitment of the design community primarily through a program called the 1%, which I'll talk about further later. We act on that commitment by employing those design professionals to engage the community around them. And we also take on projects internally. And then we share information, best practices, challenges around managing pro bono projects and the like. So these are a couple of, there are 3 diagrams I'm going to show you, and this is new for us to show these kinds of this sort of thinking internally. And this is a diagram that begins to talk about where we as a profession are engaged, but more specifically where we as an organization are engaged. And so it's pretty self-explanatory. Public benefit going upward and along the right-hand side. Private benefit along the bottom. High, low, low, high. So low public benefit, low private benefit. These are the projects that effectively never get done in the built environment, or should never have happened. These are the failed projects or projects that have never been done. Low public benefit, high private benefit. The obvious example is a private residence. High public benefit, high private benefit. A lot of commercial development falls into this category. It is a service to a larger community, but it also has a private benefit which drives the economics behind it. Here's the zone that we're most interested in. High public benefit but low private benefit. That means there aren't quite the resources to drive these projects forward. And we're not the only ones participating in this, obviously. Government is here primarily. Nonprofit organizations are here. And then we're uniquely interested in projects where we can drive a project from one category to another, because we can create value by doing this. An example, certainly outside of our organization, is the High Line in New York. The High Line probably, by most people's estimation, sat down here. An abandoned piece of elevated railroad track that had very low benefit to private or public. And through the vision of a small group of people, which ultimately became a large group of people, they drove that project to be reconsidered as a high public benefit. And in fact, I'd argue that now, the High Line has now entered this zone because there's been so much positive economic activity around it. And so you might break down this square and talk about where we're really investing our energies within that sector. Mission, relevance, low to high. Our unique expertise, low to high. Anything that falls within our mission, but we don't really provide much unique expertise to, we try to drive to our 1% program, where we actually match design professionals with nonprofit organizations. Something that is relatively low on our mission expectation, but we bring unique insight to. In many cases, we're taking on as a fee for service. And then this is where we're doing unique design solutions that we're taking in-house and driving those projects forward, because they are very high on our mission, within our mission goal, and we believe we have unique expertise to tackle it. So I'm going to show you some of these design initiatives that we're involved in. And this is a diagram that shows how we deliver on those projects. So every project that we do fits within this diagram or is a portion of this diagram. We identify a problem, or someone identifies a problem and brings it to us. We spend a fair amount of time reframing that problem. What truly is the problem that's being presented to us, and what are the priorities within that framework? And we build teams. Almost everything we do is a collection of professionals. Very rarely do we do something in isolation. That team then develops resources that can range from design guidelines to a prototypical building. There's another reframing really that should fit in between this, because that design team brings expertise that we don't have, that then questions our framing of the problem. Then we do some outreach, and that's not only to the design community, but to the community that problem resides, where that problem resides. And then within our 1% program, we can create networks of professionals and those in need of this solution and connect the two of them. And then we do outcomes and evaluations of this whole process to help inform how to do it better. So this is a project within the organization that in fact started in my private practice. It really was the seed of the nonprofit organization. Our office at the time, I think, was right about there. I have that, no, it's right there, in fact. We, in fact, now are here. We moved down the street about 4 years ago. My private practice has done a lot of things, but we were primarily doing high-end residential, which is work that I greatly enjoy. But it does have its limitations. And after about 8 or 10 years of doing that kind of work, we were starting to grow and have an opportunity to do work that had a larger impact on the community. We were getting some developer-driven mixed-use projects. And one in particular had a pretty big impact on the neighborhood. And I realized that I had a growing interest in tackling problems that affected populations that I didn't get to meet individually. So I'm coming from high-end residential, where I have a deeply intimate relationship with my client. I know a tremendous of private information about them. And that, like I said, is greatly satisfying. But the thought of trying to help a population or be an asset to a population that I didn't know directly and helped a community as a whole became tremendously interesting to me. And as a way of accelerating our exploration into this, because jobs come slowly, I decided that we would take on a project on our own. And I did what most architects do, and I opened up whatever publication or website offered the latest competitions, and I looked for a competition that we could enter. And as I looked at those competition entries and I started to think about the deal to be made, the investment of time that I would have and the return on my investment, I became quickly disillusioned with what I thought the value of my time, how that was being handled within that environment. And so I had a simple thought, which is, well, I can design my own competition brief, so to speak. We'll be the only entry and we'll be guaranteed to win. And we had a parade and, you know, big thing in the paper. But it led us to so I asked, so the competition brief was really simple. Here's our neighborhood. It's a mixed, it's a light industrial area of the city that's now going mixed use, very similar to areas of major cities across the country. It never had all the pieces of a healthy urban environment, one of which was recreational open space, usable open space. And so I posed a question to the office: what would a system, a realistic system of open space look like in a place like South of Market? And we looked at all the real world problems of this kind of urban environment. And this is typical South of Market, 4 lanes of traffic, big wide streets, very fast. You can do 50 down this street and no one will blink an eye. Crazy level of diversity here, the most diverse area in the city, and as you know, San Francisco is a pretty diverse city. So not only diverse in use, but diverse in population. So we've got a taqueria next to $1 million condos, next to a fencing association, next to a silversmith. And we've got not a lot of money, as every city doesn't have. We've got a long history of poor maintenance with open space in San Francisco. We have drug use and homelessness. We don't have a lot of vacant land. Purchasing land seemed unrealistic. So what would this thing look like? This is the existing model of open space in South of Market, small and gated because of this issue of drug use and homelessness. This is a real issue. It's not going away. We couldn't wish it away, and we wanted to deal with it very directly. So we came up with a relatively simple strategy, which was we looked at the street right-of-way, which was the largest percentage of open space that was controlled by the city that we could manipulate. We looked at taking on small bits of the street, parking spaces, and then we looked at finding a steward, a sympathetic steward, a supportive steward that would be adjacent. Remove those parking spaces, widen the sidewalk, and then was able to introduce a piece of open space that was appropriate for the microclimate of that block or that side of the street that would be a shared resource with the community and this adjacent neighbor. So we had eyes of the street to begin to address some of the safety issues. We had an invested neighbor who could work with us to address some of the financial issues, some of the maintenance issues, and help to program the space. And so we conceived of this idea of having several different uses, a kind of catalog or kit of parts, anything from a community table to a little Venice Beach muscle gym. South of Market is the gay leather district of San Francisco. So A muscle gym might serve that community. We're very interested in solutions that service real populations, real solutions for real South of Market. We're not making judgments on what open space how open space should be used. We want solutions that people will find accessible and useful who are already living in the community. A small dog park, because, as I mentioned, this is going mixed use. Now we have more residential, we have more dogs, no place to curb your dog, really simple needs. We like to think of this as a responsive urban proposal as opposed to a prescriptive urban proposal. Most urban proposals are prescriptive in nature. Use a vision of an urban world that you want. You design something to fit that new urban world. We were suggesting all we want to do is make the existing urban world healthier. We don't have a new vision for it, other than it has all the amenities that healthy urban environments have. So you can start with one. Over time, in an evolutionary way, we could see these kinds of things help populate this part of the city. This is the first project. This is a community table in front of a long-standing cafe and laundromat called Brainwash. Patty Hearst was held hostage across the street. I've never asked the owner whether the Brainwash name, I assume it did, came from that fact. So we approached this owner with this idea. This owner is, in fact, paying for approximately half of the costs of putting this in. The city has donated other monies to help support it. We're nearly complete with our city approvals, and we're hoping finally that this thing goes in as the first prototype in the next few months. We're trying, where we touch this urban fabric, we're trying to do whatever we can to improve it as broadly as possible. So this is a bioswale. We're driving stormwater runoff into the bioswale and before it makes it into the stormwater. Catch basin, another image. This is open. This will be open to anybody in the community. You don't have to do your laundry or get your coffee. That's part of the agreement. And there's a signed agreement between the owner of Brainwash and the city that Brainwash will handle all the maintenance on this project. So it might look something like this. Here's Folsom Street. That's Brainwash right there. When we were conceiving of this project, one of the problems that we were able to identify were these broad one-way streets that actually helped to isolate neighbors from one another, and therefore there was a kind of neutered community. Making streets two-way helped calm traffic and provided an opportunity for a transit corridor. We are not transit engineers. We dreamed this up in my little boutique private practice. We ended up taking this to some transit engineers as an idea. Are we stupid to do this? It turns out it's a good idea, and in fact they had proposed it to the city some 15 years ago based on a workshop that we'd done with 35 city agencies and stakeholders in the community. The Transportation Department has done a study specifically on making Folsom and its parallel Howard two-way, and is recommending it's something that the city work toward. So you can see this might change over time, more mass transit, less needs for parking, more opportunity to expand the recreational open space. I mentioned the illegal immigrant. This is Roberto, who is a day laborer. Very early on in public architecture's life, we began to explore whether or not designers could address the day labor challenge, which is there are day laborers. These are the guys who are on street corners and in Home Depot parking lots. I imagine most people in this room have seen day laborers. I don't know, are they day laborers in Eugene? No. most major cities have day labor populations. There are approximately 117,000 day laborers seeking work on any given day. LA is the largest population. There's great friction between the day laborers and the community in which they seek work. They're in informal sites, as I mentioned, street corners, parking lots. And we wondered whether architects might have insight on how to address these, what seem like non-architectural issues. The day labor community, there's been a day labor community in this country effectively since this country, since immigrants started coming to this country. Dock workers famously were day laborers, day workers. If we surveyed this room, it's likely we'd find a tremendous amount of you have day laborers in your history, in your genealogy. So what we did is looked at these problems, and we did a really simple thing. Again, I came out of a boutique practice where we were serving relatively wealthy clients, and we approached our clients in ways that architects approach most clients. We just sat down with them and talked to them and found out about the interests they had in their lifestyle, the challenges that were in front of them, the hopes that they had for an improved lifestyle. And so we interviewed dozens of day laborers and asked them what were the challenges they have. And then we interviewed also the community. How could we possibly help? And one might be critical and maybe fair that designers came up with or architects came up with an architectural solution. But we believe pretty strongly that this solution is really not a facility solution. It's actually a solution that revolves around job creation, around how a community is perceived inside another community, the kinds of things that are most meaningful to our clients, but that in fact have very little to do with typical facility problems. So this is a prototype. I'll show you more, of course. There's a simple device for sitting and waiting for work, sort of bleacher seating, some cover from the weather, and then 2 volumes that could have a series of different uses: office, restroom, critical for better relationships between day laborers and the communities that they're in, and possibly a kitchen. I'll talk a little bit more about that. This building has to do some important but simple things. First and foremost, it has to be a tool for getting jobs and job creation. It needs to be a meeting space. The day laborer population tends to be quite well self-organized. They meet routinely in different areas of the country, more so or less so, and education is very important to them. English is the most important skill that they can have. We tried to make this as environmentally sophisticated as possible. We're using PV panels to generate power. We're using salvage materials wherever possible. The entire station, both kitchen and bathroom, can thrive 100% off the city grid. Does not have to be hooked up to city services, if that's desirable. We've been contacted since the creation of that prototype by over 12 communities across the country. I'm going to show you one where we're furthest along in the development of a solution, and that's Los Angeles. This is in the Harbor City area of the city of Los Angeles. We have an L-shaped station because we have a population of over 100 every day. And we have another piece that we very much appreciate. We have a piece of property associated, a piece of land associated with this property that allows us to create a community garden. This is market rate housing. The hope is that day workers and the neighbors will work side by side in a community garden. Day laborers have an opportunity to grow food that they might find valuable, show their skills, learn skills, and interact with their neighbors. It's an image. Here's that kitchen piece. So this is effectively a taco truck without the wheels. Opportunity to earn income, learn a skill, social mixing as people come to buy lunch. Community garden. And that classroom that I mentioned, which is very important to us. Now I'm going to talk about, as I mentioned, we have a program called the 1%. Simple idea is a way of infiltrating the design profession. We suggested a program that asked every design professional in the country to give a minimum of 1% of their time towards pro bono service. It's an important distinction between pro bono and gratis. Pro bono, the Latin root, means for good, for the public good, not for free, which is the common definition. Gratis is where you're offering services for free, primarily for a business reason. I want my client to like me more. I want to be more attractive to a client. I give some services for free, which makes me more attractive. Or I want the design to be a certain way, but my client's unwilling to pay for it, or I don't think my client will pay for it. I'm willing to give my time, stay into the night, and not bill my client. That's gratis. That's not pro bono. We do far too much gratis. And I think it's because we've convinced ourselves we're not worth it. And we have to give our time away to do the quality of work that we expect from ourselves, and we don't expect our clients have the same expectations of quality that we do. In many cases, I think that's right, but I think we're far too quick to accept that deal. We've done a lot of this, by the way. Every potential, possible, imaginable sin that the profession has made, I've made threefold. But as we started doing more pro bono work, in fact, we got tougher on our gratis work. And when a client leaned on us to do work for free, because for whatever reason, I had a clear understanding of where my investment was, and I could explain that to my client. I do give my time away, but I don't give it to a developer who has a $20 million project. I give it to people who don't have a checkbook like you have it. And that was a compelling argument, and I got away with it a lot. We have over 700. I happened to see our website today. We have 700, I think, in 35 firms across the country, from single-person offices all the way to the largest firm in the country. Gensler signed up about 3 weeks ago. Gensler's commitment is for over 20 people working full-time pro bono every year. So they have a staff of effectively 20 people doing nothing but pro bono work. It's a significant investment. All over the country, as you can see. Just a chart of our growth. We're growing. This is an older slide, but we grow. It's not very old because we add about 15 to 20 firms every month. And we started adding nonprofit organizations, which is the black. We have over 330 now. We started offering a matching program. This is the 1%.org website. When we went out to the architecture community and started seeking commitment to do this, we found firms were getting our vision for how this could be an important part of their business, an important aspect of their firm. But and that wasn't surprising to us, but what was surprising to us is the next question often came to us, which is, now what do we do? What project do we possibly do? I assumed architects would be filled with projects if they sat down and said, okay, we're going to give, we're a 100-person firm, we're going to have one person working full-time, the equivalent of one person working full-time. I figured they'd be brimming with all the kinds of things that they'd want to do, given the kind of free reign that pro bono work offers. But that's not the way most architects think, actually. We primarily wait for a problem to be presented to us. We don't go out in our communities and identify those problems. But we have unique skills to identify problems. We have better skills, in most cases, to identify problems than the problems identifiers in our urban environment. But that's not what we do. And I don't want to beat myself up or you about this. This is not something, this isn't laziness. This is just the nature of practice. We're service providers, and we serve. But we can serve a community without a client bringing us a specific problem. So one of the things we did, that's a more entrepreneurial attitude, which we tried to demonstrate in some of the projects that we choose, like the open space strategy, like the day laborer project. But if you want to meet a nonprofit organization, you can do so through this portal. So nonprofit organizations, effectively online dating. Nonprofit organizations need a designer. Designers want a project that, or a mission that they're enthusiastic about. So you can go here, you can pledge, takes minutes, you can post work that you've done, you can get some exposure for it. We have a very high Google ranking. Many of the firms that are part of this program, if you type in their firm, will get their 1% hit higher than their own firm's website. We have lots of evidence that firms are getting work through their exposure on the 1% website. Firms, clients find them, like what they do, like their politics, like their gift to the community, and it helps as a decision maker for choosing an architect. We're about to release a book, comes out in September, on pro bono work across the country, literally across the country, 40 projects. I'm just going to show just a small handful of them. This is the Greater Boston Food Bank, Chan Krieger. This is SOS Children's Village, studio gang, Jeannie Gang out of Chicago. Todd Williams and Billy Chen, Library Initiative. It's a really interesting program that was done by the Robin Hood Foundation in New York, where they went into some of the most underserved public schools and invested into in the libraries and completely transformed their libraries from the design of the library to the librarian, trained and staffed the librarian. This is the Adopt a Room program, Perkins and Will, their Atlanta office, where they're looking at models of hospital rooms that impact health outcomes. I'm not going to say anything during this. You'll figure it out. There are approximately a million architecture and design professionals in this country. It's 20 million hours annually. 1% of that 20 million is a 10,000 person firm working full-time for the public good. Thank you very much. So I think there's a Q&A at this point. And actually I have questions for you, which I'll ask in a bit, because this is a new presentation for us and we're very interested in communicating what we do. So I may ask you just a couple of questions about what I just showed you. But are there questions for me? Yes?
How is the construction of the projects funded?
It ranges, obviously. So do you mean the design initiatives that we take on, like the day labor station and those sorts of things?
I assume that those things that you do, or that your organization does, are funded by your high-end residential work. But the other firms, or the other architects, professionals
Yep.
donating their time, what's paying for the
Mostly these are nonprofit, they're working through nonprofit. They're using the nonprofit effectively as a vehicle to access a community or a mission that they're interested in. And the nonprofit organization, 99% of the time, is raising the money. They're in the business of raising money. Nonprofit organizations have that burden. And they're raising the money to build, to realize the buildings. One of the most challenging issues when you're engaged in pro bono work with a nonprofit organization is evaluating whether or not your work is going to be used. That means, can that organization raise the money? Do they have the expertise and the will to raise the money to build what you've designed? If they don't build what you've designed, one could argue that your work has gone without reward. So that's one of the things that we really try to stress, that in this relationship there needs to be expectations on both sides, and the architect, particularly the design professional, needs to set high expectations for the investment they're about to make. You're making a gift, you're making an investment, and you need to articulate and expect a return on your investment, and part of that return is going to be whether your actions actually have an impact in the world. We had a small project, you know, I think about this all the time, and we get caught, of course, with our, you know, with our pants down, so to speak. We did this very small project where we were working with a nonprofit organization, building a modest presentation piece for a document signing that was part of the Farm Bill. We had met with the construction folks to build it. We had designed it. We're on the eve of starting construction. Get a call from the executive director who'd been working with to inform me that he had talked to other members of his organization. They decided that actually what we were doing was in the wrong direction, though it was exactly what he had asked for, and they really didn't need to do that project, and they needed to do something completely different. And thank you very much, but we're not going to go forward. You can imagine my excitement and pleasure. And I told him that, that because of his lack of professionalism, due diligence, commitment, our investment had been thrown away, and that I told him I was going to bill him for our time, that he would have to pay it. You know, you can't always do that. You know, that's fun for me to say. I did get to say that to him. I was really pissed off, and he heard it and had to accept that. So that was a small victory. But anyway, this is a... By the way, I never invoiced him. You know, I basically wanted him to agree to it. That was payment. But this is a challenge that's out there. Another question? Yes?
I was wondering if any of these firms doing this 1% thing ever team up with architecture schools or any kind of like design and build programs or anything like that, or even internships to get some of the work done?
You know, that comes up when we're talking to schools about utilizing the professionals in their community. I'm sure if I thought hard, I could come up with specific examples. There's no reason why that couldn't be the case and shouldn't be the case. It should be the case. And I would think there would be a lot of professionals who'd be very interested in doing that. And I know here, I got an earful today about Design Bridge, which I think is really exceptional. And I think, yeah. So I'm earning the $20. No, but actually, I do think what you guys are doing is unique, and I think it's unique because it's coming ground up. And I think you're bringing pressure to the academic system by self-organizing, and I think it's actually, it seems to me, an unusually stable and sustainable model that I think most schools are struggling with the sustainability of it. Anyway, I digress. But I think actually that Design Bridge could really exploit the design community here and get resources that would be valuable to them. Yes, sir.
John, we have a number of students that are really interested in social initiatives, and we also have now at the beginning a very active AIAS chapter. for their benefit, could you talk a little bit about John Kerry and
Yeah.
his meteoric sort of rise
Yeah.
and where he came from and where he is now?
Yeah, so John Kerry is our executive director, and I hired him. He was 26 years old, and I had forgotten I said this to him, but apparently I said to him when he wanted the job, we were looking for an executive director, and he approached us and wanted to help and wanted to be involved, and he made efforts to suggest that he might be considered for the design or for the executive director position, and I told him I am not hiring a 26-year-old to take this job. Well, I ended up hiring a 26-year-old to take this job, and John was, I should probably say John was never 26 years old. You know, the guy's older than I am, and he's 15 years my junior. But John is an interesting example because John was in the PhD program at Berkeley, never finished, decided that he wanted his path to go somewhere else. But John, during his education, decided that he was not going to be a practicing architect and he was not going to be a traditional designer. I've always admired that choice. It wasn't a choice that I would have been able to make when I went to school. That would have, for me, that would have been an ego, a loss, a hit to my ego that I wouldn't have been able to withstand. But he had the confidence to do that. And so he and Cassius Peeler co-founded an online community organization called Arc Voices, where they were looking at issues of students, architecture students, and then recent graduates. And they had started this kind of movement or this sort of, you know, community where issues were being vetted. And John became, I think Cassius was the president, and John Kerry was the vice president of AIAS National, right? So they were, you know, paid staff. And then John went off to graduate school. And then John came to public architecture and has really, John has every skill that I do not have. I mean, John is a supreme networker and incredibly industrious, and has really taken the 1% and taken us from an idea and 24 firms to over 700 firms. And so, you know, John owns johnkerryforsenator.org or something like that. So, you know, you can imagine where he wants to go. Did I miss anything? All right. Another question? So I'm going to ask a couple, and then I'm going to come back to you. So our messaging is important to us. It's how we do our work. One of the things that we tried to do here is present the client essentially in the foreground. I think it's reversed in most of these presentations, and so I talked about Martha and Roberto. Is that effective? Does it seem too cute? I mean, it makes me nervous because it does seem a little sort of, you know, up with America, and, you know, let's all, you know, hold hands and sing a song together. But can I see a raise up hands? Was that effective, and should we continue to do that? And who thinks not? Who thinks that's sort of like, you know, come on, enough's enough, we're architects. Really? You'd raise your hand and say that?
No, I just had a question. I remember, just thinking back on it, I remember what her role was with that story.
Yeah.
I don't remember the same for Roberta.
Yeah,
and
that's
I'm
a
not
good
sure if that
criticism.
was,
Well, so interesting enough, so I don't know Roberto's last name. And I don't know Roberto's last name because we had an agreement when we interviewed them that we would not take down their last names. I think they probably would have given it to us anyway, but we were just a little cautious. So in one sense, there's a kind of poetry about it. I'm making this up as I'm talking. That, you know, Roberto is not a character that's fully understood, and that's because the day laborers in our community are not fully understood. But I think that is the right criticism, and I should be presenting them differently than that. Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
If you're going to mention the clientele, you should probably put them in at the end, just to reiterate that you are.
Oh, again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like another slide with like maybe a collage of different people that you've
Yeah.
served. That
Nice.
might be really nice touch.
Nice. Good. Did you have it on this question?
Yeah, I don't find their presence too precious, but I don't see how it helps the presentation on the whole. How their being there really does something for it.
Okay, good. I'll ask one more. Let's see. I'm going to ask two. The call to action at the end, you know, you chose to be an architect. Why? Is that effective? We're trying to get people. I mean, mostly that's for professionals, right? So the idea, right? And this is, we're thinking we're way too smart here or effective, and we're thinking like, I've been working for 15 years. I'm grinding out, construction documents, and I've forgotten what it was like to sit and dream about what really drew me to practice or drew me to the profession. And this is a way to sort of get their brain back into thinking about that, and why am I here and why am I sitting at this desk every day. But one of the concerns, and I actually had a conversation right before I came here yesterday, was that wouldn't be effective with students because they were full of what they wanted to do and why they were in school. But I got a sense, was that effective? Is that emotion? Okay, wow. All right. And then lastly, the diagrams. First time I've shown the sort of inner thinking about how we position ourselves. I'm very, very interested in how we sit within the larger profession and what we're trying to do. And there's a more dynamic diagram that I'm not showing about where we're going in the next 40 years as an organization and how in the hell we're going to get there and pay for it. And I don't really know the answer to that, but I have this model working in my head that I hope becomes the thing that works. Are those diagrams interesting? All right, enough of that. Yes?
I have a question about that actually, is that a lot of times when we see things like that, there's this grand sort of utopian vision or, starry-eyed idea that an architect brings about what they could be or could do. And you seem to avoid that more. In fact, I don't think you even defined what the public good is, just that we should be working for it. Yeah. And I appreciate that and what we saw, and I'm curious if you can say why you took that approach.
Yeah, it's a nice comment. We spend almost no time telling people that they should be generous. For one thing, most of us, I don't like to be told that I should be generous. And I think that most people don't need to be told that they should be generous. What we really need to do is help people understand, particularly firms and professionals, how in the hell we make this work from a business standpoint. I didn't talk that much about it, but I realized there are practitioners here, which I didn't anticipate. And so a lot of times I'll talk a lot more about the business side of this. How does this make good business sense? How does this improve our success financially? Very important because it's the fuel that sustains long-term commitment. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And because we want to turn this on its head, I come out of practice. I came out of RISD at a time when thinking about social justice, thinking about politics and architecture, that was the furthest thing from my mind, and it was the furthest thing from my education. And I don't begrudge that, but I began to realize the folly of that separation. If you were a progressive designer, the progressive design community did not hang out with the socially progressive community because the socially progressive issues neutered the clarity of design. And the social progressives didn't hang out with the design progressives because it was trite. Their mission was so great, making beautiful handrails was insignificant. Bullshit. I'm sorry. That was not right. I mean, it simply wasn't the way to think about it. And these things are not separated. They're not incompatible. They're completely compatible. We should be bringing the beautiful handrail to the mission, because if we don't believe that that beautiful handrail makes a difference in people's lives and improves organizations and the people that work in them and that they serve, then we shouldn't be making beautiful handrails. Was there a question in there? I'm sorry. I've now since I entered that profanity, I'm all flustered. But any other questions? And I'll let you guys go. Yeah. And I haven't forgot about you.
It's more of a comment about the diagrams that you're saying. I didn't know what the 1% was when I was looking at those. I think you mentioned it one time. I'll get to that later. But I mean, just maybe like a one line on what it is, so that I could understand what the
program where we ask every design professional in this country to give a minimum of 1% of their time towards pro bono service. Yeah. Yes. But that diagram, is that what you mean?
And to put it together in my head, I'm just saying for future presentations.
I see.
A one-liner.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Let me get to you and then.
I was just going to ask, when you were talking about the Brainwash Cafe,
Yeah.
I think you said that 50% of the funding was coming from the owner and 50% was from the city of San Francisco.
Roughly, it's less than 50% from the city.
So
Other donation.
So in a situation like that where it's not necessarily being funded by a nonprofit, how do you go about approaching the city? Like, what's the process that you use for getting that? Because it was your idea and you started it,
Yeah.
and how do you really jumpstart that kind of project?
So why that project became so interesting to us and why it became a catalyst for creating organizations, and I had very low expectations for other than it being a laboratory for us to experiment with ideas and experiment with our role as a designer in the community. I never expected anything to be built out of it, I don't quite remember. A planner in the little planning department in conversation found out we were doing this project and invited us to give a presentation at some noontime, where they gave out free pizza and the planners showed up and we just talked about what we were doing. Well, they were really enthusiastic about it and they really encouraged us to take it forward. And there were several other industry agency folks there from different agencies in the city who all said, this is meaningful and you should do it. And oh, by the way, and this is really fascinating, oh, by the way, you'll be able to get this done far better than we'll be able to get it done. Because in a contentious place like San Francisco, there are half the population hates anything the planning department has to say, and half the population is willing to listen. But half that population will not accept it simply because the planning department said they want to do it. So we were neutral. And in fact, it's been one of our biggest assets. We are neutral, and so we can go into communities. We can call up every architect, or any architect that we want, and we can say, we want to do a project with you. Will you come and play with us? We almost never get turned down. So back to your question. So when we were at the city showing this off, I realized that we had tapped into something that was sitting there. And all it took was using the brains that we did every day serving our clients. And it could really go somewhere. And so it was the idea that led to all these other activities. We didn't know how we were going to raise the money. We didn't know how we were going to find somebody who'd be interested in it. It was the idea that led us forward. And the idea knocked on the doors effectively and made opportunity available to us. So we, as designers, were able to conceive of a solution that, in fact, had more momentum than we were able to give it by hustling around the neighborhood. That solution got incorporated in some of the planning of an area called Rincon Hill. I bumped into a planner who said, oh, by the way, we're using that strategy for Rincon Hill. We had left some little thumbnail images with one of the planners, and they had scanned it in, and then they were using it as their presentation material to talk to the community about what was coming. Anyway, so that's a weird situation where we started with an idea and just floated it out there, and then it sort of happened. Most of the projects we take on now are much more tailored. They have an end date. They have an expectation. They have goals. They have strategy for how we fundraise for them. And mostly, we're not doing the fundraising, as I mentioned earlier, for the built piece. We're doing the fundraising for the design services. I'm going to take two more, and then I'm going to let you guys go.
I was wondering if you could just touch briefly on the business aspect of it, because I know that as students graduating, eventually have to pay back student loans, but wanting to get involved in, social architecture, how that can be achieved. Financially.
So I would say probably there are two different categories. One is as a recent graduate who's trying to earn enough money to pay rent, let's say, and then one is as a firm who's got all these moving pieces and a big monthly expectation for bringing in income. I would imagine that those things are a little different, although I haven't thought a lot about it. But as a young professional, as a new professional, let's say, one of the interesting things about pro bono service is there are vehicles by which you can put yourself in a position for doing a level of work that you may find difficult to obtain through the early years of working for a firm. Because again, you are making an investment. You're bringing something to the table. If you're in, say, conversation with a nonprofit organization, you're not only providing your service, but you are making the value of that service as an investment in their organization. So you already come with a much different negotiating environment. And negotiating sounds too, too capitalistic in a sense, but I actually think that one should be negotiating there because, again, you're making that investment, you need a return for it. There are grants that you can get. A lot of these pro bono projects lead to paying work. The Martha story, the homeless prenatal, we did that early assessment. We identified that building, and then as a small firm, I said, that's as much as we can do. We packaged the whole thing up, and we said, go to another architect. Here it is all packaged up, and have them do the design work to renovate that building. And they said, no, we want you to do it. And I said, we can discount our fees by this amount, and we can do it. And I tried to give it, have them go away, but they came and they demanded that we take on that project. So, again, ultimately, I'm not sure that the balance sheet looks great on that project, but it was, if I was a young professional or a new professional, that could have sustained me for a year. One more question and relief. Yes, sir.
It looks like your organization is very inclusive. You try to engage the design professionals in part of this wonderful activities.
Yeah.
So you might have product designers, you might have city planners, you might have some other building planners. Why you identify yourself as a public architect instead of public designer?
Ask me that last part of the question again.
Or why you identify yourself as a public architect instead of public designer?
That's a good question. We debated this a lot and still do because we're going to be reaching out beyond the architecture community. We already do, but we don't do so actively. There's something about the word architect that has meaning beyond the architecture community. Design, we were concerned, sounds less specific or less committed to the built environment. I'm making some of that up as I'm talking to you, and I'm afraid I'm insulting people as I think out loud. It was a hard decision to make, and we still have doubts about it because so as an example, the AIGA, the American Institute of Graphic Artists, has approached us to bring the 1% program to their 22,000 members across the country, and they're clearly not architects. But I think that we can include them because I think there's something about the idea of being an architect or the word architect that every designer can identify with in some way. We could be wrong about this, but yeah, we made that decision because we thought public architecture sounded better than public designer, I guess, or public design. So that's the best way I can answer that one. Thank you so much.